Hello, tiny friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Pet Sematary Diorama, where today I will be creating this part of the entrance, which is the sign. It was pretty unanimous that I begin on the front section of the cemetery, so this is where I'm at today. And during this episode, I'm going to be going back and forth and referencing several different photos of the entrance sign, and we'll be talking about all the different pieces and parts that make that up. And we'll be looking at different angles. A lot of the photos have different lighting, so it reflects different colors on the salvaged pieces of wood. So I'll be working on the aging of all these different pieces and just trying to get as accurate as I can from what I am referencing. I'll be talking about it as I go through the photos and as I'm creating the individual pieces. I'll be pointing out some of the things that I'm noticing. We'll see what I can come up with and how I get there. I'm going to be using my scrap wood today for this project since all of these pieces and parts are salvaged wood and things that have been brought in by the children to create the entranceway. So to begin with, I'm going to use 3 different pieces to create the backboard of the sign. And right now, just focus on the shape of the sign. There are also several different pieces that are attached to the sign, both front and back. There's a lot of layering that goes on with this process of aging. I've done this technique in past projects when I created the floor to the sewing room in the Josephine house, when I created the old man's shelf, when I've created little parts that go in the house. It's basically the same technique that I'm going to use today. I also showed a different technique of aging when I created the wall that goes up the stairway in the Josephine house. So I've done different techniques to age, but I'm going to go back to my basic way of aging. And I use my craft knife, and I also use scissors because scissors will cut this wood and leave uneven edges and jagged edges. The thing about aging that's so great and I love so much is that you don't have to be perfect. You just go to town. It's old, it's aged, it's not going to be perfect, and the pieces are going to be rugged and jagged and uneven and pretty much worn down. There's going to be a lot of nicks. There's going to be a lot of bangs and marks, chipping and splinting of the wood. I also like to add as much natural aging as possible to give the wood some realism. So like wormholes and adding the texture of the natural grain in the wood. As the wood would normally go through the different stages of aging, it goes through different colors during those different stages. So there's lots of layering of color as well. Including all these details really makes your wood look very realistic and naturally aged. So to begin with, after I get out my pieces, some of these pieces I'm going to be cutting to shape. Right now, I'm just trying to go with the shape of the sign and what the backboard is shaped like. So once I get my pieces out, I like to take my craft knife and just work the edges. I'll create some grooves. I'll cut out some little wedges here and there. Cut through the board so that they look like they're cracked and splint. And then I'll take my craft knife and just kind of remove some of the edge around the boards or the pieces. So I just kind of like carve those out and skim those pieces off, leaving indents and make it look like the sides are worn down. Here's a good look at some of the detail I've created on this piece, both front and back, because you will be able to see both sides. And then I also like to take my needle files and just file on some of those grooves. It really makes a big difference. Some of the lines that I've created, I just go over them with my file and it creates like these deeper kind of grooves and just adds more detail to them. So I go back and forth creating all these different details as I'm going along, and there's no specific order. I just work it as I'm thinking of what to add. Right now I'm just adding some natural grain texture with my craft knife. So I'm just creating some lines, and they're not straight lines. They're wavy, uneven. And then I go in. Now I'm just using my needle file on the edges. I don't really go into the midsection of the board. I just file around the edges. Some of those lines and cuts that I've created on the edges. Then I'll go in with a poker tool or my needle file and create some wormholes and maybe some knots. And then finally, I'll give it a nice sanding all the way around. It helps make the wood look worn down and not freshly cut up. So now that I've got all my pieces prepared, it's time to add the layers of color. And I'm going to start with my antique wax. You can use watered down brown acrylic, you can use wood stain, you can use antique wax, but I'm going to start with a base of brown for this because I would imagine at some point the wood was nicely stained and then maybe painted over. I'm also adding a little bit of water, not a lot. I'm not really watering this down too much, but I'm adding a little bit of water just to spread it out a little more. And I don't want it to be super thick and heavy and dark. I just need a base color of the brown. All these different layers do come through. I don't cover them all up completely as I'm adding each individual color. So you can see the different tones, and in the end, it just makes it look much more realistic. Like I said, over the stages of aging, they go through different colors, and all that shows in the end. So my next color will be a darker gray. And then as I'm going through the layers, I get lighter and lighter. The gray is watered down pretty well because I just want hints. I don't want super thick layers. And now I'm going to work on the little shelf. And I'm starting to create the individual pieces that will be attached to the sign. And there's a little shelf that sits around the top, on the top of the sign, and it kind of sits at an angle like this. But I'm going to talk about this little shelf later on. So now I'm going to go in with a lighter watered down gray. So I've just added more white to the same gray that I'm using, and I'm using a pewter gray. And I'm not covering completely. I'm just splashing it on there. I'm not being very neat. I'm just going on this. I think like the more sloppy you are, the better it is. And now I'll go in with a watered down black to let it seep into some of that detail that I've created. Sometimes I let the layers dry completely. Sometimes I just add on top when they're still a little damp and not fully dry. I think it just depends on where I'm at in the process of this. Okay, so here is the backboard of the sign all dried and put together. This is what it looks like. And I have my individual pieces prepared to be attached. I'm going to be adding more color as I go along for the finishing details. Right now I added a little bit of cinnamon by Folk Art, and I added white acrylic to that. And then I just used my dauber sponge and just sporadically put a little bit of that on to add some different tones and textures. I'll be going in with shadowing and highlighting, but I like to leave that for the end. But right now you can see all the layers of colors and all the texture, and this whole process of doing all of that just really improves your piece, especially when aging, because all of that is really there on a naturally aged piece. Once these pieces were dry, I went in and did a little bit of dry brushing with a lighter gray. And once I get all these little pieces attached and everything is in place, I'll go back in with my shadowing and lowlights and some highlights of white. I'm just going to use my tacky glue or white PVA glue to attach all these little pieces onto the backboard. And now I can go in with my shadowing, and I'm using a detailed brush. So a tiny little detailed brush, and I've watered down some black acrylic. I'm gonna continue this process with layers as well, because anytime you water down acrylic, it dries a lot lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. So if I need to darken it up, I do that. So I just go along with these final touches of shadowing, my low lights, adding in all the black areas, and I kind of want them to be really dark so that the contrast just pops. So I'm just going around the pieces that I've added. I'm going into the nooks and crannies where the dark shadows would be. I'm going into any of the cracks and crevices that I made. I'm going around the edges. I just want all that detail of all those splints and cracks to just pop right out. And then I just repeat the process as needed until I get the tone that I like or the darkness that I want. And then after I let my black dry, I go in with white and start to add my highlights. There's a lot of highlights in this sign, so I'm just going to try and simulate where all those highlights are and just kind of try and replicate what I'm seeing. Again, the different photos have different lighting, so it makes these pieces shift as far as color and what they look like as well. But there's a lot of white splashing going on in the midsection of the board, so I'm just adding that as well. And now I'm going to go in with that green again, and this is very, very subtle. I actually created this sign before the gate, so that's what made me think it was okay to add it to the post, but I was so heavy-handed with those pieces. Here, it's super, super subtle, and it just gives that hint. So it's a really great detail. It just kind of looks like a little bit of mossy mold. And I'm only placing it around this little board down here on the bottom. Now, in some of the photos, it kind of looks like there may be some, but I thought it would be a good detail to add. Okay, so I skipped ahead and wrote Pet Sematary on there, and it also looks like maybe there had been a couple dirt bombs thrown at the sign. And so I'm just going to add that with brown acrylic, Mod Podge, and a little bit of dirt. And I've mixed this all together, and I'm just putting a couple spots down where I see it on the sign. I think maybe some of the kids had thrown a couple dirt bombs at the sign, because that's exactly what it looks like. It's just on the P and the E. And once I get this on, I'm just going to add a little bit of real dirt. Just sprinkle it on there. It'll stick to the Mod Podge and give it more realism and texture. Here's a good look at what the finished sign looks like. So that whole process of layering and all that wear and tear and distressing that I've done, you can really, really get a good look and see all of that work come out. It's very rewarding and worth it in the end. I'm going to move along and create the bigger pieces that are attached to the sign. There's about 3 shutters and a ladder, and I'm going to work on that. Now, I had one piece of this square dowel, and I was able to cut it in half and create the first shutter with that. So I've already stained those pieces and they're drying, and I'm going to use all these little scrap leftovers that I had from when I installed the wall going up the stairs. These pieces are already aged. I showed that process in that episode, and I just knew that I was going to use these extra pieces for this project. So I'm glad I had so many left over. And they are actually coffee stir sticks that I've cut in half to make the pieces skinnier, and then I cut them down to size. And I'm just going to begin to glue these pieces on the dowels to create the shutters. For the second shutter, I had to just use what I had and make do and kind of make up the sides. So I've taken longer skinny sticks and cut them in half, and then I'm going to glue them together to create a square dowel. These pieces are uneven, they're not perfect, and that's perfectly fine because it adds to the aesthetic of the H. So right now I'm just gluing them together, and again, just make and do with what I have to try and create another shutter. These two shutters are a little bit thinner as far as width. They're kind of like the average shutter you would see on the windows. So they're narrow shutters. They're not so wide. The third shutter that I have to create will be more of a wider shutter, and you'll see the difference. So beginning with the first square dowel that I had originally and stained, I sanded them down to wear down the stain and just make it look more aged. And now I'm going to begin with the widest panel in the shutter, and I'm just going to put that right in the middle and then begin to apply all my little pieces. All these pieces are uneven. They're not evenly cut. They're some are wider, some are skinnier, some are broken, and that's what I want. You don't really see that too much in the picture, but I thought that, you would see them be really worn down being out in the weather like that. So for my shutters, I wanted to create them to look really rickety and broken, and you'll see what they're going to look like in the end. Okay, so I got my pieces on and they need to dry completely before I add my top bar because I am going to have to cut them down and I'm going to have to make sure that all of the bars are even so that when I add the top bar, it sits on there evenly and can glue down nicely. So I'm just estimating how far I need to cut these down, and that looks pretty good. So before I cut anything, they need to dry completely so none of them pop off. But you can see how some bars are missing, how they're all different colors and aged, and that was just all left over from when I did the process of the wall. Now that I've cut them down, I just applied some tacky glue and I'm just going to put the top bar on and just apply some pressure to connect them really securely. Okay, so I got my second shutters over there drying and I'm going to set them aside and let them dry before coming back to them. I'm going to begin working on the ladder. There is a ladder and I found another piece of wood that I was able to cut down. The ladder is going to be about 7 inches tall, so that would be 7 feet. This is that dry, brittle wood. This was just scrap wood left over from my very first dollhouse. So I think it was used for maybe some siding or trimming or baseboards, something like that. But I also have these skinny match sticks, and I'm going to use those for the steps. I've counted how many steps there are that I can see that are visible. And I'm just going to begin to measure my length. And I did try cutting them with my scissors. And then I said, you know what? Let me get out my miter shears, my easy cutters, and I just use those to cut my pieces down. So I can see 6 steps and I just space them out accordingly to fit along the length that I have. And there's also a broken step. So I'm just going to take my craft knife and peel away some of the bottom part to make it look like it's broken. And this step actually hangs down a little bit from the side of the ladder. So I just want to make sure that the end of this piece looks really broken and has all that added detail in there. Okay, I got my ladder glued and I'm moving on to the wider shutter, and it's basically just the same process as the first set of shutters that I made, and I'm using the same pieces, the leftover pieces from the wall, and I have created more dowels for the siding. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this picture. You can see Old Man Judd standing in front of the sign, and he's a lot taller than the bottom of the sign. So the sign hangs pretty low. It was made by the kids, it was made for the height of kids. So in the movie, he actually has to duck to get into the cemetery. So I'm just getting a visual of where I need this sign to hang. There's also a post that is made up and sits on the side of the sign. So I'm going to show you what that looks like as well. So you can see in the red circle that there's kind of like a curved piece of wood that hangs from the sign. It's attached to the sign and hangs down to the post. There's a kind of like a bedpost or a stair rail that is stuck to a backboard, and then it has these cross boards on the front of it. So I'm going to be creating that as well, and I'm just going to use these pieces. And I'm sorry if the pictures were grainy. I can't really tell in my editor, but I'm going to kind of simulate what I'm seeing and just try and create that with what I have. The post isn't identical, but it still gives the idea. For this little piece, it's a dry, brittle piece of wood, and I've already cut part of it off, but because it was already curved, I'm just going to try and add to that to make it look more like the piece that's in the picture. It has kind of like these grooves that are almost kind of like 3D. So I'm going to use wood glue to create that detail on these pieces of wood. It's not going to look identical, but it is going to look more like that piece and just give off that idea. I will have to go in with a second row because this piece looks like it has a carved design on it. Now I've already started the aging for the post and the piece that will sit in the front, but this time I started with a base layer of watered down gray. I kind of skipped the brown because this piece looks like it's that really light gray weathered look. So I just skipped the brown and went right to the gray, and now I'm just dry brushing a light gray on top of that. Once those pieces are dry, I'm just going to glue them all into place. And I'm just using my tacky glue for this. Okay, so here's where I'm at so far, and I've got all my pieces that will be attached to the front and back, except for one piece, and that's the stair railing that you'll see in the photos. I'm going to create that in the next episode. But as far as these pieces, I got them all put together. I'm still working on this piece, so that's still in the process. But I'm going to go in with my black and start adding that black detail of shadowing, and then I'll go in with my white highlighting and dry brushing and begin adding my final details. Now, some of these pieces and parts are going to change. As I started to put them all together and attach them to the sign, I realized my sign was too small, which was the first, because normally I'm making things too big, and I have to tell myself it's a lot smaller than what I think it is. So I go back to the drawing board to recreate a new sign. Only this time, I'm just going to use one whole piece and make it look like individual pieces. But here you'll be able to see the difference in the two pieces, the old sign versus the new sign. And I wish I could just lay this sign on top of that one because I like the way that looks. But that's not how the sign is created in the movie. So I'm going to skip over the whole process of creating the new sign since I showed you what I've done. It's going to be the same exact process. So I want to talk a little bit about the shelf that sits on the sign. The first sign that I made the shelf to look like this picture right here. But as I went through some of the other photos, I got different views of the shelf. So in this photo, you can see it kind of looks like a metal grate and you can see through it. This photo, it looks like something else completely different. So I'm going to create the shelf for the new sign to look like this photo here. And I'm going to go with that shape. I'm still going to use wood, but you can see the first sign, it's just a solid piece like in the first image. And then I'm going to go with the last image and just try and simulate that shape. But I just used my needle file to file out those grooves and create those spaces. Okay, I'm going to be making some changes to this gate. Now, I went back in to watch the movie and I got a really good look at the gate in the cemetery. And the original design of the gate does have a lot of those S-shaped scrollies, but I'm going to keep this gate. I like this gate, so I'm just going to stay with that. But it was a lot whiter, so I'm going to add more white to it later on. I also realized that the gate sits up off of the ground, and originally I wasn't going to connect these two pieces together, but the only way I can achieve that is by connecting them together. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use these bead pins with the little hooks on the ends because they're smaller than the eyelets that I have, and I'm just going to drill some holes in the post, glue the pieces in place, and then hook the gate onto it. Now I have a functioning gate that will swing open and sit up off the ground. I will add some more white to it and then call it complete. But you can see that it sits up off the ground and now it can just swing back and forth. I do like it much better now, and I'm glad I went with this decision. I will probably be viewing the movie quite often during this whole project. As for these two pieces, the post and the little curved piece, I'm going to add those on to the sign and sitting in front while I'm setting this up. And you can see the post that's in the front of the gate post. So I made the decision to have the webbing more viewable from the side as if you were walking into the cemetery or if I turn the camera, because it is a detail that I want to be seen and it wouldn't really be seen if I had it facing the front. So that is why I made that decision. Okay, so I've got all my parts. Everything is done. I had to scale down the ladder. I had to cut down the wider shutter as well. But my new sign is created. I'm pretty happy with this size. You can see the difference in size, but they pretty much look the same other than the shelf. Not much of a difference, but this little sign, I'll probably include this in my next giveaway, which will be at my 5K. I'll be including other things as well, but this sign will probably be included as well, and then somebody else can use it for something they want to use it for. Hopefully someone will find a good use for this in one of their projects. So here is the new sign, and now I am going to start gluing the pieces together. This is what the back looks like. Here's how these two pieces will look once I attach them to the sign. But again, I'm going to wait until I'm setting up the sign. Okay, so right now my three shutters, they all look exactly the same, just different sizes. And this bigger shutter is actually more brown in the photos. So I'm going to go ahead and just stain it a little more with my antique wax just to give it more of a brown color. You don't see this much in the front. You see it more from the back, but this way they won't blend in with each other and they'll look like separate pieces. I also added more white to the ladder because in the photos it looked a lot more white. I don't know if it was painted white or if it was just the lighting. So I went ahead and added a lighter shade to that as well. Now, as I'm playing around and putting these in place, from the front of the sign, you can see the variations of the different tones of each piece. So it looks like different pieces you see a lot of different tones and colors, and from the back, it looks like it's all one color, whether it's a light gray or a white. It just is all one color. You don't see the different tones. You can see more of the ladder and more of the wider shutter, and there's also a 2x4 plank that goes across the wider shutter. I can't really make out how far that extends, where it ends, where it begins, so I'm just going to use my imagination. I'm going to breeze through putting these pieces together because it did take me quite a bit of time to get them placed exactly where I wanted them to go, and I'm just using my tacky glue for this. Okay, so for this 2x4, I'm not really getting a good visual through the pictures, but I would imagine that it stops at the ladder. If you look carefully at the front view, right in the circle, there's a tiny little dark spot underneath the board. I believe that could be the 2x4, and it extends to the ladder and stops there. So I'm going to cut it down and just extend it to touch the ladder like so, and just have a tiny little piece of that visible from the front. Okay, so here's how everything is looking, and I'm going to go in later on and add a little more brown to the shutters just to bring them out a little more. But for now, I'm going to go onto the back. I've got a very light gray, and I'm just going to brush it all over the back to create that light color that we see in the photos. I can't really tell if it's all a white color or a light gray, so I chose to go with a light gray as a base color, and then I'll go in and dry brush some white highlights, and I'll also go in with some black and create a little bit of dark shadows and just pull out some of the details in the wood so it doesn't look so flat. So this is where I'm at. Now, I didn't show it in the video, but I did go back in later on to the front of the shutters and added a little more brown just because I felt like the color was so dull and it just needed some more dimension. So you'll see what that looks like in the next episode. I hope you all have enjoyed this video today, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and click that like button. Now let's take this piece into the cemetery and get a visual. Okay, so this post will be sitting in front of the gate post like so. And then this little curved piece will be attached to the top of the post and to the sign. And then the sign will be connected to the trees from the shutters. So in the next episode, I will be working on installing these pieces. I still need to create the broken stair railing that sits in the front as well. And there may be another piece or two. I'll have to look back and check on that. But I will begin laying down some grass, working on the trees, and adding some details in the landscaping, which is going to be super fun. I'm so excited to do that. And then I can move forward to some of those ideas that I had for added details in the front of the diorama. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I want to thank you all for subscribing, and welcome to all my new subscribers. Thank you all for coming along with me. So whether or not you're a subscriber or you're just passing through, either way, I really appreciate all your support. And if you enjoy my miniature projects and have not subscribed yet, please subscribe. It really helps my channel to grow. And don't forget to hit that top bell notification button to be notified every time I upload a new project. Before I come back with another episode of the Pet Cemetery, I'm going to do a few videos on the Josephine house, and I'll be doing some work in there. So if you would like to see what I'm working on, please tune in for that. And until next time, tiny friends, I hope you all have a lovely day, and I will see you all on the mini side. Bye-bye.